Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 212. And before we get started, a quick reminder, please follow Identity Office Hours on LinkedIn or YouTube. The topic today is, and I'll change our banner, MCP Auth grows up inside the 2607-28 draft, which just recently came out. So we're doing a timely episode. As you can all see, our guest today is Ayesha Dasanayaka, Associate Director, Architect at WSO2, and I hope I got your name about right.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Mike. I'm very excited to talk about this new spec release, especially focusing the authorization inside the new spec and how it has come this far.
So we're going to skip background today because Ayesha was already a guest on episode 141. So if you want to hear her background and her illustrious career, tune back to the first 5 minutes of episode 141. Just a quick note, all the episodes have a wiki page. It's glue.co/IOH- the episode number. Today is episode 212. So we're going to dive right into MCP. Ayesha's been really focusing on MCP. So this is my chance to ask all my questions about the latest update because I'm not following nearly as closely. So I'll start with kind of a high-level question. And from your perspective, what do you think are the most important security enhancements with this latest spec?
Before going deep into this latest spec, so I would like to be given like talk about how it has come this far, because when the MCP first released, it didn't have any auth on it, because it was on local machines running on STDO, and the spec hasn't talked about MCP at all. Then the first version then came with Auth 2.0 as baseline, and then the other MCP server was playing the role of authorization server. So then it has, so the duties of the MCP server was for the resource server plus the auth server, and then um, uh, 2025 16-18 release. So then it properly decoupled the roles from the client to the resource server to the auth server, and then there onwards. So MCP spec has been evolving uh, pretty fast to uh, on top of the existing standard plus a set of new standards that has been adapted to the MCP spec. So in the recent spec, so what I see as interesting, one of the things are this client ID metadata documents, and also which gives you a lot of flexibility on having a handshake with the authorization servers. And again, this extension, enterprise manage identity extension, which is not in the main spec, but it's a supportive extension for enterprise manage agents to allow users to authenticate with their enterprise IDPs and then exchange tokens with their MCP server's authorization server. So those are some of the interesting stuff.
Yeah,
So what do you find interesting? Yes.
we're gonna dive into that more, I guess. And I'm just gonna throw up the link to the to the notes again, because I liked your article, Yasha, because it talks about the evolution of MCP and how the spec has been reacting to, um, I guess, the real world requirements and things that are happening. And sometimes that type of detail is lost in the spec. The spec doesn't tell you focus on what changed, and specs don't always focus on the why. So they just tell you this is how things are. These are the musts. These are the shoulds. but you don't always get the background. And to get the background and the context, sometimes you need to, it's really helpful to understand that, but you won't necessarily get that reading the spec. So Yesha wrote a good Medium article on sort of the history of the changes of MCP and the evolution, as she mentioned, from an originally running just locally to today, which is more oriented towards enterprise use cases. Let's start with SIMD, actually, because SIMD is a really interesting spec. And maybe tell us a little bit how has the position evolved in this latest spec towards SIMD? So then for people who don't know, SIMD is client initiated or client identity metadata document or client initiated metadata document. I'm not sure which, but basically it's the idea that the client asserts or returns or provides a URL where it publishes its metadata, sort of like in SAML. In SAML, a lot of SPs publish a URL, and they use that URL as their entity ID, and you use that URL to fetch their metadata. And so I feel like SIMD sort of follows that pattern. But what's been the change in SIMD in this latest spec?
Yeah, yeah, as you mentioned, client ID metadata document has been uh, introduced as a way of how the client starts a negotiation with the authorization server. So if you start from the beginning, um, agents can spawn up from anywhere. So I can try to plug my cloud code instance, or you can try to set up your OpenCloud instance and try to consume a particular MCP server. So then there's no uh, so the in the old world, what we had to, there should have been a way how these clients are registered. So there has to be the first thing we could do is doing some kind of a offline registration and get a client established in the authorization server. So then on top of that, we have dynamic client registration where you can dynamically get registered into the authorization server. But in most enterprise setup, it wouldn't be a feasible thing. So anyone wouldn't organization won't allow anyone to come and register clients. So they are like, so that's not, and also that's not going to be scaling to the level that agents are spawning. So then on top of that, this client ID metadata document become a self contained proof of who this client is. And as Mike mentioned, so it comes with so it replaces the client ID to a URL, so where the authorization server can look up for that URL, and it will give you a signed JWT which has information about who's the provider of this agent, what are the callback URLs, and all the information, all the metadata about this client, similar to somewhat similar to the SAML world that some of us are familiar with. And then once the authorization server validates that this is coming from a legitimate client, it allows uh, to to continue the authorization flow from there onward, initiating a login flow and allowing the user to authenticate with the authorization server and eventually send an authorization code to the client. So that's how it has been evolving. And the advantage there is that you don't need to have a pre-registered trust with the authorization server, because authorization server dynamically can validate your client's existence. So
Yeah,
that's how it
it,
comes.
it's interesting because so I think the one of the assumptions is that these are going to be very ephemeral interactions, and we don't need a long-lasting relationship. So we don't need to create an entity that's going to be in our database. Like every time a client registers, most IDPs create a database entry for that client and issue it credentials. and then that means that there's probably an expiration for that client at some point. It creates some like overhead, and I think the idea was probably that like we want something more efficient so that the client can just assert its identity. Here's my identity, and you don't even need to create an entity for it in your database IDP. You know, um, although there's still a trust model underlining this, though. An IDP wouldn't trust any client necessarily. The trust model is going to be based on the URL. So here's a client asserts my URL is abc.com, and my AS says, oh, well, I trust that domain, and therefore I will allow this client. So it still gives the AS some control over which client domains it might trust. And from a cryptographic level, it's using SSL or TLS as the trust model to make sure it's actually connecting to that domain. So there is still a trust model. The difference I see with software statements is in the software statement, the client is registering and saying, here's a JWT that shows I'm trusted by this issuer. In SIMD, the client says, here's my URL, and you can trust it because you trust this domain via TLS, but there's no actual token. The other main advantage is it gives the RP a stable identifier, because how do you correlate an RP across two different domains if you have two authorization servers and they both give it a domain-specific identifier? You can't correlate that RP, except maybe in redirect URIs. Although if those are localhost redirect URIs, they won't help. So I see the advantage of it, but I guess I'm wondering, is this new system so is this the preferred way now for MCP? And are there any other inherent security advantages to this approach? And does it open any new security vulnerabilities now that we're moving to this new model? It's like what's the trade-off? We did away with DCR, but there must have been some type of trade-off. Do you see any trade-off with CMID?
Yeah, one major trade-off I see is that with that model, we don't kind of get an idea about the instances of these clients. For example, if it's especially in the agentic scenario, if I have uh, my one agent running in one code running in my personal laptop versus my one code running in one of my VMs, still it'll point to the same client ID URL. So then there's no distinction between these different instances of these clients that we are running. So not having that visibility, I think that's a drawback in a way, because at the end of the day there'll be a audit saying that Aisha has accessed this particular resource through Claude, but it doesn't say which Claude instance. It might not. So that kind of thing, scenario. So that I think I see as one of the drawbacks, where we lose the visibility of for these different instances of these softwares.
Yeah, and there's no client secret, and there's no private key other than the private key that we're using for the TLS connection.
Yeah.
So if the client controls is able to duplicate that ID, as long as they control the domain, they can do it. So there could be multiple instances. We don't really know. Yeah, and it's interesting that there's no client secret here, and there's no client like with regular clients. We have a client secret like an API key and password, or we have asymmetric secret. So the client can register a public key, and we can do a challenge response to show that that's the client. But there's no way for a client here to prove that it's this returning client, other than the fact that you have the TLS connection. Is that right?
Yeah, true. That's true. So we don't distinct. So that's same problem that I mentioned earlier. So there's no distinction between these instances of versus this
Hmm.
class of software clients. So I would really love to see that if we can introduce some registration ceremony on top of that. So initiate with the client
Hmm.
ID, but then if you can bind it to a instance, so that from there you can like onboard an instance of that particular agent, especially in the agentic domain, and then have some kind of a key pair like private key WT setup or something. So from there onward, so it will have the existence in the authorization server, and we can distinguish, and if we needed we can revoke that particular agent from there. So that will give you that first class visibility for that agent, if that can be evolved into something similar.
Right, right. That's an interesting revocation's an interesting point because normally you would just remove the client or remove the client's secret or public key, but now you're saying we're trusting their URL, so we'd have to like I guess create um, um, a deny list for certain URLs in order to block it from performing actions. And I want to say re-registering, but as you're saying, we could re-register. So we could use the SIMD document as a bootstrap for registration. That's, I think, what you were suggesting by sort of
Yes.
a hybrid approach.
Yes.
Um, but it, yeah, it raises some new questions. I mean, I like the idea of an attestation based registration. There was an OAuth spec for that a while back. I think it expired. There was a draft that expired called attestation based dynamic client registration.
Mhm.
Maybe that needs to come back, or maybe there's another answer for it.
Yeah. So yeah, I would really love to see some kind of development around that areas. Yes.
So let's pivot. I mean, SIMD I think is really important. It's also gotten like a ton of adoption. I think in even Glue supports it now.
Mm.
Um, but let's pivot a little bit to a topic just quickly because I believe we covered this a bit in episode 198. But there's I don't know if it's a should or a must, but there's a potential for mix-up attacks. If you get back a code, you really need to make sure that that's a code for the same authorization server that you were originally working with. And so there's a new requirement, or I think it's a requirement. I'm not sure if it's a must or a should in the MCP spec to validate that the response that the code that you got in the code flow should contain a new response parameter called issuer, and that
Mm.
issuer should match the request that you made. So if you see a response for that you made to one issuer and the issuer doesn't match or the issuer is missing, you should reject that request. Um, and I guess is this does that fully mitigate the attack? And it seems like a lot of authorization servers won't be able to update their core implementation to return a new response, you
Mm.
know, in the authorization response. Um, so how strict is the MCP spec about this? And how do you see adoption of this feature going forward? Like how quickly will ASs be able to even catch up with this?
Yeah, so it's not a must for the authorization servers in this version. So
Hmm.
it's a should for the authorization servers to send back the issuer in the authorization code response, and if it's available, then the clients must validate it. If it's not, then it can't. So it's not a like a rigid requirement in this spec version. In terms of adoption, so the thing so it's quite a ask from all the authorization servers out there. So they those servers need to update server side to send this response. And from the existing client's perspective, there are already applications working and doing these validations, rather the validations doing the OAuth dance on their client side. So whether they want to update into that, plus whether having these additional parameters fail their functionality. So that's kind of a question that we get when we don't talk about the adoption of it.
Yeah, and this recommendation, I think, definitely came from the mix-up attack surfacing and
Mm.
being brought out, and this was a direct response to trying to address that concern. Um, and
And on top of that, so in traditional applications, we one application usually interact with one authorization server. So that's how that we are used. But with agents, agents can connect to multiple MCP servers, multiple resource servers that connect to multiple different authorization servers simultaneously when they are working. So it's more prone to that mix-up attack as well.
hmm, the client, when a client gets back a code, it should already check that the state parameter is the same. So it needs to know that that I am in, this is the same session that I started, not just a random response, maybe to some other flow that got sent to me by mistake. So this is almost like another check that's required on the client to say, okay, not only must you check the state parameter in of the response parameters, but you need to check the issuer. Um, so it is kind of a big ask for developers to add this new. Developers are bad at doing the stuff that they need to do in OAuth to validate. Um, so it's sort of, I think it goes both directions. That it's going to be hard to get developers to understand why they need to do this, um, and it's going to take issuers a long time, I think, to catch up with this new response code. I don't know. Um, this is something we added to Janssen auth server. I think this current version. So, but we're normally like quicker. I think auth zero hasn't done it yet, and it might be some time. So, like the mainstream ones, I don't know, might be longer.
Mhm.
Anyway, go back if you want. If you're confused on this issue, rewatch episode 198 with Emily, where she uses her pets, her guinea pigs, and her cat to explain why mix-up attack would be bad. Um, and so let's move to this is another sort of like it's a weird sort of footnote about application type. So I guess if we're registering a client, the application type, I think, will signal to the AS perhaps different rules for what redirect URIs it allows. For example, for a web application, we generally don't like localhost redirect URIs, but for a native application, like a React application or a mobile application or a command line application, um, then that might be acceptable. And so there's a mention in the new MCP spec about this parameter application type, and I guess this would be for situations where you're not using SIMD, where you're actually doing dynamic client registration. But maybe where did this come from? Maybe you can shed some light on it, Ayesha.
Yeah, so this is for the DCR, dynamic client registration scenarios, where the agents or the clients are being registered on the fly, and who don't have the CIMD support. Yeah, so as you mentioned, so most of these agents will be CLI clients, and the ones that are running locally to the end users. So their pattern is that they will on the go they will spawn up authorization callback webhook, and mostly in the local host, and listening to the callback callback for the authorization code. So uh, by default, most authorization servers treat these applications or the dynamically registered applications as web applications. So there are restrictions where the localhost URLs will not are not supported. So then, so the dynamically registered agents or the clients are unable to complete the full auth code ceremony because of this restriction. So
Hmm.
by indicating that this is a native app, which is natural for a native app, it is natural to run in a local machine and expect a token authorization code for that particular user's behalf to that particular machine's callback hook. So having that mention allows you to register the agents as it is, rather than uh, having to represent as a different type of a client in the authorization server.
So it seems like this is more of a profile where MCP is saying if you're if you're an AI app, or you should or an MCP client, you should specify native. So it's more like it's not introducing something new. It's more just saying here's a feature that already existed, but make sure you use this one feature correctly. So it's more like guidance.
Yes.
Um, and there's also a note about scope accumulation, um, and that seems kind of dangerous to me. So I guess that means I'm getting several access tokens. Um, but what is that about actually? Maybe you can help explain that.
Yeah, so what the spec says is that spec gives a recommendation for the clients to how to handle these scopes. So it's for gems. So we always recommend going with starting with least privilege, and as you need, obtain new tokens with more permissions. So personally, I also feel that this is a bit of a dangerous situation. Either you will have multiple tokens with different authorization levels, and as you go along, you are accumulating multiple
Mm,
permissions into one particular one token as you work the longer. So which is again which where you will end up having a token with some kind of some good level permission. So personally, I also feel this is a bit of dangerous scenario. um,
yeah, combining scopes in particular. It was episode. I guess I just did this episode. I feel like last week, episode 208, um, from 716,
Mhm.
with Niccolo Gallo. He gives a good example of how dangerous aggregating scopes can be. So I have one, and especially if you attenuate the scopes. So I don't know. This is a very complicated permission or issue. I'm a little skeptical about that this should be handled at the protocol level. Um, but the example Niccolo gave was basically delete file and read all files. And if you attenuate delete this file to just delete, and you attenuate read all files to just read all, and then you add that you combine them, you get delete all files. And so,
Yeah.
depending on how you actually combine, once if you the thought is attenuation is always good, but actually attenuation, if it also allows you to combine, is potentially very dangerous. So you need to keep the original context. I don't know, but MCP should be neutral on the whole authorization thing. So um, I don't really understand what they're getting at here.
Yeah, so that one confuses me also. So I am also not a fan of that particular recommendation.
Um, and one of the things you wrote in your article was that when you introduce MCP into your environment, you're introducing a non-deterministic actor onto your trusted zone. I wonder if that's true because the non-deterministic input is coming from the LLM into the MCP server, but on the other side of the MCP server, what it can do is quite deterministic. So, and the skills of the MCP server itself are deterministic. So, so what's or do you really think it's non-determinist? We're introducing non-determinism onto our network?
Yeah, so consider mostly on the enterprise agent scenarios, right? So, for example, as WSO2, I decided to set up a customer success assistant agent for that customers can come and get their services. So
Mhm.
they are so we it's like that the agent becomes someone like more like a human than they are. So then customers will come and ask questions and give their queries to this particular agent, and agent will try to call the data internal service support portals, or through the MCP, let's say through the MCP, or then uh, and get data. So if that if that customer, let's say customer is you, Mike, and if Mike try to tweak around it and give some prompts and try to extract information from me through that agent, so then we can't guarantee that agent won't do it, right? So we have to have that controls around that agent, because now the agent has a brain to think. And unlike in traditional software where we know how the execution path happens and the steps are deterministic, agents more of get goals. So to get to that goal, they can define their execution path at the runtime, and they even can code some tools as they uh, to get to that goal. So so in that sense, we don't know what they will do in order to get to that particular goal, so they are non-deterministic.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is that, well, the capabilities available for a given MCP server are discoverable through a standard mechanism. So that's a deterministic list of tools or skills that an MCP server might have. It sounds like what you're saying is that before we had a more deterministic way to control what types of queries you could make, whereas now the agent might be making any combination, and there also might be less input validation that goes on into the queries that are coming into the MCP server. Um, and that is different. But um, but still, actually, I see that, especially if you look at the service discovery, how service discovery is built into MCP. Um, it maps very well, I think, to a capabilities-based authorization approach, where we should be able to know what are the actions that this service is performing on which resources. So if
Mhm.
it's an MCP server for my marketing intelligence platform, the MCP services are discoverable. Um, and then the resource is sort of implicit because we sort of know, well, this is um, you know, get current developers might be the action, and the resource is implicitly my marketing database,
Mhm.
right? So we do I do see MCP as sort of aligning well with sort of exposing this known sort of capability surface area on the enterprise. It's like MCP is letting enterprises saying, here are the things we're going to let MCP servers do. Um, so it's almost like MCP is just creating an interface, and because
Yeah.
letting them call the APIs itself maybe isn't a good fit. So we're going to create this new interface in front of our APIs and other enterprise assets
Yeah.
that's sort of optimized for AI.
Yeah.
Um,
So the consumers are the non-deterministic part of it. So MCP will be very like it has a defined interface and defined set of capabilities and defined set of resources that's exposed and defined set of actions. But once it's in the hands of an agent, we don't know how those will be combined and tools are executed by the agent in order to get to a goal.
Um, maybe I'll digress from the MCP topic just for 1 second, or maybe this is related. But
Mhm.
one pattern that I've noticed is when MCP was announced, we saw a plethora of MCP gateways be introduced.
Mhm.
Um, because everyone was like, oh, well, we want to control access to MCP. Let's put a gateway in front of it. Um, and now what we're seeing is that there's a new class of gateways called agent gateways, where the idea is that the agent connects to the agent gateway, and the agent gateway then knows which MCP layer, services are available to it. And I feel like it's the fastest abstraction layer creation of all time, because it
Mhm.
took us years to go from like MCP gateway to to API gateway to service. And now we're like, oh, well, so that took years, but it only took a couple of months for us to say, let's put an agent gateway in front of our MCP gateways. Um, do you have any thoughts about that new architectural component? Wasn't the MCP gateway supposed to be the agent gateway? And do you think we need this new piece of infrastructure because MCP has itself become an enterprise asset that it needs to be front-ended? But
Mhm.
any thoughts on this, on basically agent gateways?
So there are for the agent gateways, I see a broader use cases. I see three types of outbound calls that are going through agent gate that can go through agent gateways. One is LLM traffic. So that if for especially in an enterprise setup, the LLM traffic enterprises are preferring to route it through a gateway, and then the MCP traffic or the resource traffic, and then the egress control to the third party other services like if you take an organization, they would be having multiple other third party services like Google, GitHub, CRM systems, Salesforce. So that third party governed services also need to be accessed by these agents in an enterprise setup. So all that holistic uh, different types of traffic control uh, goes to the agent gateways and including the MCP gateway. So maybe eventually we will not see MCP gateways, rather the agent gateways that controls all these multiple type of agents outbound traffic.
So you're saying that I want to make sure I see everything that goes to Anthropic. So I want to make sure I'm proxying the LLM queries and responses
Yeah.
directly, not just the queries to the tools. So it's doing more than MCP gateway, I
Yeah.
guess. But you're saying it could also probably become an MCP gateway itself in a way.
Yeah, it could be in a way. So then those are converging into one particular
Mm.
gateway, but the naming is different, can be different, but it's converging. And the third type of traffic, especially when the agents want to talk to third parties, there has to be some egress control, whether we should allow these agents to go to that egress systems, and how to bind tokens to these multiple different third parties without giving that token directly to the agent.
Okay. The big change in this new MCP spec is the fact that it's asynchronous. That's sort of like the
Yeah.
probably the most important everyone's issue. I'm focusing on the security because this is an identity um,
Yeah.
podcast. Um, but do you think the asynchronous nature of this new spec has any impact on security or any other impacts on the MCP spec that people should think about?
So I think this stateless mode is it's in terms of global MCP community, that's something that's the like biggest news, as you mentioned. From a security standpoint, also, they have earlier there has to be some sticky sessions and bounded sessions that needs to go into that agent, and they have a like lot of so as you mentioned, developers are not good at doing authorization, right? So there were many who were using this session context instead of proper tokens to get around Auth. So now that those requirements are not needed anymore, so the authorization can be more cleaned, and solutions can be built around that more cleanly without hacking around this session binding and all.
Yeah, session binding's a nightmare. Um,
Yes.
good job, MCP community, for getting rid of sessions. Um, um, do you think uh, this area is evolving so rapidly? Um, what do you think are the next things that MCP should focus on to improve the security, or where do you think the standards need to go to really get us to an acceptable level of security, which I don't think people think we're at right now? Where do you think we need to go?
So one thing is that so we in the MCP spec, there's MCP host, there's MCP client, and MCP server. So in the architecture itself, but I think MCP host doesn't have the visibility in this Auth ecosystem. So that's the agent, actually. The host is the agent. If you take, so there can be multiple agents connecting to one particular host, multiple clients connecting to one particular host. So having giving that host an identity, and also identifying these different instance of this MCP host in the Auth ecosystem, I think I'd really love to see that evolvement there. So there was some I've been talking about it, and I've been writing some of that as well. So that goes back to what we discussed along with the CIMD also, where we see the class of clients, class of software, but not the instances of software. But in the agentic domain, it's important that we see this instance of software as well. So I'd like to see that MCP host authorization coming into play.
So the pigeons are flying. So I guess I had more questions, but we're out of time, so we'll just go into last thoughts. Any last thoughts before we break?
Yeah, so MCP has been evolving very fast during the last couple of months from its beginning, and so I'm as one of the AIF ambassador. I'm very excited to see how it's evolving, and I'm active in the community also. And I I see the adaption and the possibility that it has been evolving. So we have been incorporating these CPO capabilities into WSO2 product stack, WSO identity platform, and our very new project, open source project Thunder ID. So all these new capabilities are there. So I'd love the audience to try them out and give their feedback around that as well.
And does WSO2 have an agent gateway, or
Uh,
I know
we
there's an
do
MCP gateway?
Yeah, I'm from the IAM side of the organization, and
Uh-huh.
we have APIM side of the organization. So that side we have the AI gateway capabilities.
Okay. Um, And I will just quickly announce the next episode. We're going to go back to Cedar. John Kastner is he's one of the members of the Amazon Automated Reasoning team. So Rohit and I are going to have a discussion about what's been happening at the CNCF now that Cedar's at the CNCF. Um, and quick reminder, please follow the live stream. I'm trying to get to 3,000 followers. So your help is be appreciated. And with that, Ayesha, thank you so much for staying up late. I know it's late your time. Next time we'll do it earlier on Thursday morning. But thank you so much. It's great. Thanks for the update, I should say.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward for the next one.
Okay, and thanks, audience, and we'll see you next time.